We are finally in my domain. For context, I spend a lot of time and effort planning meetings, conventions, and expos. I do it a few times a year. It's been a huge part of my life, so I'm pretty excited to be able to talk about that over this module. So let's go ahead and jump right into the material. It's actually going to be a little shorter today, but I've given you a lot of long modules lately, so maybe it's good to have a good paced one. We're going to start with just kind of talking about building meetings. Now, there's going to be a lot of terminology within this set of slides. Don't freak out. It's going to be okay. We got this. Let's talk about mice. Not the scurrying little mice. We're not playing Ratatouille in here, but the meeting, incentive, travel, convention, and exhibitions. It's kind of the thought of thinking about this segment of industries that really focus on business and product related conventions and expos. This is your Dragon Con in Atlanta. This is your boating trade shows. This is your massive incentive travel where they try to get lots of people to come into one resort for some sort of thing. This is meetings like the economists have. We have, oh gosh, too many conferences. We have the Southern Economic Association conference, which is about 10,000 people. We have the American Economic Association meeting, which is about 20,000 people. Well, every time we want to have one of those meetings, we need to have meeting rooms. We need to have equipment. We need to have places for people to sleep. We need to have places for people to eat. And there's a lot of moving segments in this that we need to think about. So really focusing on this particular part of the conference and convention world will help you if you decide to work in hotels, lodging, meeting and conventions, visitors bureaus, universities, basically anywhere that you might be interested in that's going to have these larger catered events. So according to the American Society of Association of Executives, that's just too long of a title. There's about 90,000 and change, about 91,000 different trade and professional associations. That's a ton. Like that's all your boating, gaming, motorcycles. Oh, I'm sure there's ridiculous ones out there. I'm really into plants. There's lots of plant associations that are really into like trading and high volumes and propagating like really nice and rare plants. So these association businesses is big business, and they spend billions holding thousands of meetings every single year, typically in large cities that can manage the volume of traffic coming through, and these in turn attract millions of attendees. So the hospitality field has many different associations, right? We have the American Hotel and Lodging Association, the National Restaurant Association, the American Culinary Federation, everything else in that paragraph. I'm not about to read all that out. But know that every single one of those will actually need their own meetings and conventions to be able to plan meetings and conventions. It's a racket because now we have Zoom where we can do everything far more efficiently online, but it's a very important part of the process. It's how you network and meet people, and it leads to lots of different jobs and changes in careers. So belonging to an association may give you a sort of a government or political voice, right? So trade associations tend to have a lot of political lobbying power. They're able to work with their legislators to try to get laws passed in ways that would be beneficial to them instead of harmful to them. It also allows for different marketing avenues if lots of people come through. For example, wedding planning conventions. New brides and new grooms and new just people who want to spend their entire lives together tend to go to these giant things called like bridal expos, where every single person who like makes cakes, every single person who does photography, every single person who has like large venue spaces, they're all there to talk to you at the same time. And that's basically free advertising and marketing for them, because there might have been a company that you were unaware of that now you're aware of. There's also different types of education services these associations provide, and networking within their own groups. Now, there's lots of major players when it comes to the convention industry, and by far the biggest of them is the Convention Visitors Bureau. This is called the CVB, and unless you're someone who plans these sort of things, you might not interact with them, but they're the reason that all the fun things in your city or area tend to exist. These deal with corporation associations, meeting planning, convention centers, specialized services, exhibitions. They work on getting together spaces, and they work with local businesses and retail and hotels and theme parks and everything else to try to bring together giant experiences that will bring people in, right? So CVBs represent local businesses. It is very hard for a restaurant in an area to get a giant company to put their meetings in their town, right? It's very hard for the people who print particular materials and promotional items to get someone to come locate. But what if we put together the restaurant, and we put together the promotional people, and we put together the hotels, and we put together the transportation industry, and we all wrap them up into a little bundle and had someone represent them when selling these giant money-making conventions on why they should go to that city or town. That's what the CVB is. So a number of these bureaus have offices of representatives and sales teams who make sort of like follow-up visits, and they follow up on different leads that they have to try to generate businesses at trade shows and getting people in. The CVB sales manager often invites the meeting, convention, or expo organizer. So whoever's organizing the event, they'll say, you know what, I know that you're not sold right now. Come down, have a familiarization trip. Let's do a site inspection. I'm going to prove to you that we have all the facilities that we need to be able to make your event perfect. In the United States, there's about 1.3 million different corporate events every single year that about 84 million people go to. 84 million people spend a lot of money, it turns out, and their companies spend a lot of money. The total direct spending on these events can be over $30 billion, with an average event generating over $500,000. $500,000 is a big deal to most cities and towns. So associations represent the interest of their members, and these sort of gather at different regions. I talk about economics a lot because I just like economics. But I'm part of the Southern Economic Association. That's an association that meets in the southern part of the United States for regional conventions. I'm also part of the American Economic Association. That's a national convention that we have that moves all over every single year. We have international conventions, like we have the Western International, I forgot what it exactly it's called, but basically we move around the conference internationally for economists all over the world to be able to go to. So sometimes it'll be in Japan, sometimes it'll be in Australia, sometimes it'll be in the US, sometimes it'll be in Africa. So these sort of things are just really, really interesting to think about, because associations are huge revenue generating industries. And they might meet for many different reasons. They might meet for their annual meetings or conventions or conferences. They might meet for some sort of scientific, educational, or training meetings. And these meetings can be anything from shareholder meetings to sales meetings to incentive trips to product launches to focus groups to sharing information. And it's just so interesting, right? So come on, go to the next slide. There we go. Let's talk a little bit about destination management companies. So we had mentioned destination management companies before. You should probably remember that from the past, but we were talking that in more of the visitor one-off, like trying to get together with 15 people to go on vacation to Iceland sort of thing, right? A destination management company can also do much higher scaled events. So destination management companies are service organizations within the visitor industry that offer a host of programs. They say, okay, you want to come here? Well, we're going to make sure that we can help you out. So we're going to have a riverboat tour for your people who want the riverboat tour. The people who don't want the riverboat tour, while they're not doing that, we're going to be able to have a wine tasting on set. And for the people who aren't interested in either one of those, or they might have families with them, we're going to make sure that we have a daycare available so that they can have their kids. Having all these different services put together to meet the client's needs in a destination location, these are very important to being able to sell that destination, especially to meeting planners or performance improvement companies. So meeting planners, they do a little bit of everything. And this might be all the way down from like a small workshop for 20 people. I put on a ton of those. They're interesting, but they still require a lot of work. You got to think about honorariums. You got to think about food. You got to think about lodging. You got to think about how you get people from the lodging to the building, renting rooms, all these other sorts of things, to doing it for tens of thousands of people, which turns out tens of thousands of people don't agree on what food they want and what time of day they want to be awake. That's just always the truth. So meeting planners may be independent contractors who end up contracting out their services to both different associations and different corporations. So it's not just like the American Economic Association that might need a place for a meeting. It could be West Virginia University. It could be Apple. It could be Google, right? So about 212,000 full and part-time meeting planners work in the US. And they stay very busy. Meeting planners can have roles in the pre-meeting activities, which have lots of planning and thinking about the big idea and setting up the budgets, to on-site activities, making sure everything's moving smoothly, making sure everybody who is hired is there and that all the activities are moving, to post-meeting activities like follow-up surveys and figuring out what they could do better next time. No matter how large or small the meeting is, there has to be really clear specifications on what the client wants. And we figure out what this is through sort of a request for proposals or a request for quotes. A lot of the time, times, if it's a very, very large association, they know they need a regional conference, they'll say, okay, we have 20,000 people. We can take those 20,000 people to any cities we want. What we need is we need a place to feed them. We need a place of at least 3 floors of meeting space. We need places that can house individuals in at least 8 different buildings. And they put out like a request for proposals where you know exactly what they are. And then you figure out, okay, does my city have that? Does my city have that? Can we make sure my city has that? And then you bid for this. So meetings and conferences, workshops, seminars, any of these types of events, they're designed to bring people together for the purpose of exchanging information and affecting behavior. Now, we also have lots of service contractors. So service contractors are a little different from meeting planners in that they're part of the system. Meeting planners sort of plan out how everything goes. Service contractors might be the person who is providing food and beverage. Service contractors could be general contractors, people who do decorations. But at the end of the day, what it sort of refers to is the individual responsible for providing services that are needed to run the facilities, right? So meeting planners have several critical interactions with hotels. They need to negotiate, and they need to make sure that when they're going to a place and they say, hey, we're planning on bringing our conference here, we don't want any surprises for our guests, right? Because we know we're bringing in 20,000 people. We don't want them to think that their hotel rooms are $100. And then like a couple weeks beforehand, all of a sudden it's like $450 because the hotel's full. No, we would like a flat rate for our members of maybe $250. Having these sorts of negotiations for convention centers or reserving blocks of rooms in hotels at specific rates, this is really important from a meeting planning perspective. Once meeting planners in the hotel and conference facility sort of agree on all these things, then they can sign a contract and start actually looking at these sort of things. So these contracts are legal documents that binds 2 or more parties, and they sometimes are years out. So the American Economic Association, 20,000 people, that's a lot of people to bring to a city at once. So our contracts tend to be like 5 years out. We are planning with these hotels 5 years beforehand and signing a binding legal contract. Now, the structure of these contracts have sort of changed during COVID, especially because a lot of these giant meetings that happen every year that bring in hundreds of thousands of people to different towns and cities, all of a sudden screech to a halt. And each of these contracts originally had a clause in it that said, oh, I forgot what the exact term is, but essentially if like a global pandemic happens, the contract just gets voided. But then that very negatively hurts the hotels. So we've really been thinking about what does this contract and legal document situation look like moving forward. We also have to think about like conference event orders, banquet event orders. These are the ones we talked all the way back into hotels and lodging, but it's really relevant here too. We need to know what all the necessary information for departments are so that they can have a detail for the setup. What times, what layouts, if it's one of the hotels, do we need it to pull the wall back and have a really big auditorium? Do we need to put the walls forward and have lots of small meeting spaces? What are the arrival times? What times do we need to be set up for food? Is it a plated meal? Is it a buffet? These are very important pieces. Afterwards, the best part about meeting planning, well, not the best part about meeting planning, but one of the most important parts, but one of the most under-recognized parts of meeting planning is thinking about the post-event meeting, sitting down and talking to the client and figuring out what went well and what can be improved for next time. So places that tend to be venues for larger association meetings are almost always in city centers. It's very difficult to go somewhere that's not nearby a major airport when you need to fly people in from all over the world. That's why we don't very often have international conferences in Morgantown. Most of the time they'd be up in Pittsburgh because that's close to the airport. Also, city centers, they have Uber, they have transportation, they have places for people to eat when you have a swarm of an additional 20,000 people. Most of the time, meetings and functions are held sort of at hotels or convention centers. So sometimes you might have gone to a hotel where you notice, hey, that's weird. Why does there not seem to be any rooms for people on like the 2nd or 3rd floors? And they turn out to be all meeting spaces. Those tend to be convention centers or convention-based hotels. These sort of conference centers can make it so that people can both stay and work for a few days within this hotel. Which is really nice. But there's been a real shift to having more unique venues. For example, I put on a lot of conferences in hotels historically, but in this past summer, we ended up having a conference in Portland, and this was a smaller one, so we could try out something new. What we did was we found this really, really cool boutique hotel that we were able to essentially rent out what looked like a really fancy apartment that had more of a how do I put this? Intimate feeling to it, where we had people sitting more at like group tables that felt more like familial, and we had people bringing in just like trays of food for self-service. It was just a different sort of way of going about it instead of having like these gray and tan. I am so sick of tan walls, especially in Marriott and Hilton's. These tan walls where you're just kind of like sitting and doing the same thing over and over. It was really neat to have another experience. So these sort of like boutique or unique venues are becoming really popular. You've also seen a lot of corporations, mostly pre-pandemic, but they're starting to bring it back, starting to have like cruise ship meetings where they will just take out their entire company on a cruise ship for a week, and a lot of your meetings and stuff will happen while you're there. And convention centers throughout the world tend to compete to host the largest exhibitions. It's the same as, why do different cities compete to host the Super Bowl? Because they really want that many people to come in, right? Why do different countries compete to host the Olympics? It doesn't make financial sense. Every single time that a country has put on the Olympics, it has actually led to the direct bankruptcy of multiple countries. It is expensive. There's material that does not end up getting used. There is entire stadiums that are built that are never put to use again. Why would someone willingly host the Olympics? Because it brings in a lot of people, and it puts you on the map, and it puts your country's name into people's mouths and makes it a tourist destination for them. It is the biggest piece of marketing that you can possibly do. And that is why a lot of these different places compete to get these very large exhibits. Whew. Okie dokie. Well, that's actually going to be the first half. Like I said, it's pretty short videos this week. So I'm going to go ahead and pause it here, and I'll see you over in the next one.